is the editor of Real Clear Markets and senior economist at H.C. Wainwright. John Authers is the global investment editor at the Financial Times, and Doug Flynn is certified financial planner at Flynn, Zito Capital Management. John Tamny, let me start with you. If I can put this in street terms to try to understand it, and correct me where I'm wrong, the Fed cutting rates the way they are right now shows how much trouble we really are in, because it's kind of like chemotherapy. When you have cancer, the doctors are going to give you chemotherapy, which is basically killing you, in hopes that it'll kill the cancer before it kills the patient. These Fed cuts, they're hoping it will stabilize the market before the dollar spirals out of control and kills us all.
Well, I think the dollar already has spiraled out of control. It's been weakening since 2001. The problem with the Fed is the Fed should not be targeting the Fed funds rate. We don't have the government fixing the price of Xboxes or TVs. Why does the Federal Reserve get to control the price of access to credit? The Fed should be doing one thing, and that's stabilizing the value of the dollar. When the Fed does that, you'll see that markets will go skyward in a way that's good for everyone. When the dollar's inflating, this is always bad for stocks.
John Authers, it's almost like we're on a sugar high. If you look at the Dow, I mean, I don't know. I'm not an economist. I don't follow this stuff. I haven't followed it my whole life like you guys probably have. But it seems like you know, the Fed does something and the stock market gets on a sugar high, and then it comes crashing down again, and then it's a sugar high and it comes crashing down again. We're in a unique position right now, are we not?
I'm not sure about unique, but you need to go back a very long way. I mean, if we're going to continue with medical analogies, I actually think heroin might be a good one. You need to give ever bigger doses of the same medicine to get the same response. That being said, I think you may be being a little harsh, dare I say, on Ben Bernanke. What they're trying to do, they don't want to bail out the bankers. They do want to bail out the financial system, because if the financial system crashes, you need to look back to the 1930s for what that would mean. That would be bad for Main Street, right, well, as well as for Wall Street.
But that's what I was saying earlier to in my question to John Tamny, which is, it shows how significant the problem is. That's the system, if you will, has cancer. That's the only reason why you'd be giving this chemotherapy to the system. It's bad.
Absolutely right. No, there's no question. This is very, very serious. And in terms of the way in which they've recently relied on setting the Fed funds rate, you've noticed that in the last few weeks they've started inventing completely new ways of funding banks. They've started funding brokerages directly. These are all, you know, very, very desperate measures to try to keep the system going. The one defense I'll give you for that is that if Wall Street truly crashes, if the basic mechanism for financing businesses and consumers goes south, then that would be very much of a problem for Main Street as well as Wall Street.
Doug, hang on just a sec. Doug, let me go to you for a second. Why, I had several calls on my radio show today. Why did gold crash? If we're concerned about too many dollars in the system, if we're concerned about inflation, how come gold came down, I don't even know, $56 yesterday?
Well, it's more than just gold at issue here. The jury is definitely still out on Bernanke, and you have to, coming back to interest rates for just a moment, the further we lower them, the more we're going to have to raise them later on. So a lot of that is being baked into the current price and the speculation and the pure valuation. Everything that hits its high is eventually going to come off. Now, it may come very well back up over where it was before it settles down in the long term.
Okay, John Tamny, the rest of the world is suffering inflation, and they're suffering from our lower value of the dollar. And I saw that Vietnam is thinking about unpegging from the dollar. I think there are 5 or 6 countries in the Gulf region that want to unpeg from the dollar. The rest of the world is affected by this. How long are they going to put up with us, as the president of France has just said recently, with us trashing our own value of our own money?
I think it's tragic what we're doing to the rest of the world, because if you look at historically, when we devalue the dollar, what happens is other countries have to weaken alongside with us. They don't weaken as much, but you're seeing inflation at 18-year highs in Australia, CPI of 13% in Qatar. You're seeing inflation at, I think it's 14-year highs in Euroland. When we devalue, the rest of the world has to, and it's a total shame.
John Author, Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac, the government is saying we need more regulation, we need more regulation, but at the same time, what they've created in Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac, which holds a lot of the mortgages now in the country, what they've created is yet another Bear Stearns. They are reducing the obligation on these two organizations, right or wrong.
Yeah, it's a crisis measure. I think there are ways you can defend it as a crisis measure, but in the long term, going back to the history of why these organizations are the way they are, it's close to indefensible. You know, there's a case for, if you have a true government entity, for having a government entity in there, but then you need to be honest about it and keep it in the government's hands. If it's not a government entity, then it needs to be truly in the private sector. It needs to compete. What you have at the moment is a system which obviously is regarded by everybody as having an implicit government guarantee, which goes out there and competes with that huge advantage of a government guarantee with people in the private sector. And there's a very good argument that part of the subprime problem was that everybody else had to start taking bigger risks in parts of the market where Fannie and Freddie didn't go, because there was no way to compete with Fannie and Freddie.
Okay, and Doug, the average guy, and I'm not talking about somebody who has a portfolio, I'm talking about the average guy, the average person that is, that remembers, growing up and saying, their mom saying, don't order milk, you can have milk at home. What are they supposed to do now? What is the best thing that they should do? What are we preparing for?
Well, the thing we have to know is that none of this is really going to right itself until they stop lowering interest rates. They need to at least say that we've halted that. And the only way to get the dollar stronger and to fix a lot of these is to start raising interest rates, because inflation is there. So what that, the way to fix inflation is to raise interest rates. So what that means is this probably is going to be with us for a little while. And the average guy, if he's making ends meet, that's about all you can do. I mean, we get back to, from the very beginning when you start out, that you probably should not be spending 100% of what you make, or in some cases 105%, as a lot of people do. If you always live on 80% of what you make, then you have a little bit of room, a little bit of a buffer for times like this. And it might be a little while before we get back to that. And that's sort of the lessons here. We're getting back to those old adages of, actually putting 20% down on a mortgage, those kinds of things that we should do.
Gentlemen, I thank you very much for your time. America, I was shocked by a poll today that says 30% of American people are cutting back on food and medicine already. 57% say that they're going to do it soon, and 53% of us now in America say they're thinking about cutting back on their heat